Hello and welcome to Wideangle. Look at international affairs. In recent weeks, events in various parts of the world somewhat unfortunately pushed out of the front pages and our TV screens an event of great importance. Europe is always important to all the continents, and European elections in the end of May threw up some interesting results. Those results they give us a clue as to which direction Europe and individual countries of Europe will adopt in various fields, and whether they will get along together or not, and if they get along, on what terms, and then what will be the equation that a country like India have with a disparate European Union. To discuss this, we have an interesting panel. On my extreme right, we have João Cravinho, who is publisher and editor of a journal on international affairs. We have the ambassador of the European Union, João Cravinho, and Ambassador Vinod Grover, who knows Europe well because he has been ambassador in those parts. What is the significance of, Ambassador, why don't you feel? What do you think is the significance of these elections?
Well, we have been holding elections to the European Parliament for decades, but these elections are particularly significant because they are the first elections since the Lisbon Treaty, which gave considerably more powers to the European Parliament. And so for the first time, you have in this election a direct link between the voice of the citizen and the choice of the main jobs of the European Union, in particular the President of the Commission, who has just recently been chosen after the elections as a direct consequence of the elections. So we have a European Parliament that is growing in powers, and we have a European electorate that is, I think, growing in understanding of the relevance of the European Parliament. Having said that, just as in this country, in India, when there are national elections, and just held them, there is a mix of a national vote and a vote that is related to whatever is happening in the different states. Also in the European Parliament, there is partly a vote thinking about the European Union and partly thinking about national conditions, whatever they may be.
João, there has been a great deal of talk of a protest vote. Now, what is this? Could you define this protest vote which has come out in very high profile in these elections?
You have seen a very significant rise in votes to the far right and to the far left, caused partly by economic conditions, which are far from satisfactory, especially in countries of the south of the European Union. And also, let's face it, on political issues. It's easy to see that people are protesting, but you also have to admit that people are expressing opinions, and a lot more people now feel more nationalistic than they are European as compared to some years ago. Therefore, they are looking upon the EU institutions with suspicion and sometimes with resentment because of what is perceived as a democratic deficit on the part of an administration, of a bureaucracy which has become somewhat insulated from the common problems of the European population. And I'm afraid that the election to the Parliament has not necessarily changed that, because as a result of that very strong protest vote, or at least dissident vote, you have a Parliament which is, of course, going to be rather indocile and rather protest-minded.
Right. Vinod, João talked of nationalistic urge expressing itself in this vote recently, which he said contradicts the European, the pan-European facade. How do you see that? Then that means the larger idea is getting corroded rather than strengthened.
I think it's certainly under pressure. I mean, there's no doubt that the far left, Eurosceptic and nationalist parties, meaning the right, have gained ground at the expense of the Federalist parties. I'm going to quote you some interesting figures. The ongoing Eurozone crisis, an offshoot of the Great Recession, started several months after the last Parliament election in June 2009. Although it affected most EU member states, the hardest hit economies were those of Southern Europe. Greece, Cyprus, Italy, Spain and Portugal, along with Ireland. Among other reasons, harsh austerity measures significantly affected the public approval of EU leadership. The percentage of Greeks approving the EU leadership decreased from 32% in 2010 to 19% in 2013. While in Spain, the approval dwindled more than half from 59% in 2008 to 27% in 2013. Overall, only 4 out of the 27 member countries approved the EU leadership. This is from Wikipedia. So I mean, this shows that Europe is under pressure as an entity as to whether people can continue to serve under this leadership.
Europe ambassador was supposed to subsume nationalities to some extent, and the common denominator was going to determine Europeanism. Now that seems not to be happening. There was always resistance to it, except, I mean, in France they were very keen at one stage. Germany was also there. Britain was never serious about the project. And now you have these splintering of nationalisms. How do you explain that?
I think 2 or 3 important points have been raised. Firstly, with regard to Wikipedia, which I think is an admirable project, it should never be the sole source of information. And there I would recommend that viewers also look at Eurobarometer. Eurobarometer is an opinion poll that has been tested on a number of questions over many years, and you can see evolution of thinking very clearly. The evolution of thinking actually tells you something quite different from what is suggested in Wikipedia. What it says is that Europeans want more issues, increasingly want more issues addressed at a European scale because they realize their own countries are not capable of dealing with them individually. So there is admittedly a sense, and one finds that not only in Europe, one finds it around the world, a sense of unease, sometimes with political leadership. One finds it within European countries as much as one finds it with regard to European institutions. I think the important link that is now being established between elections for the European Parliament and the choice of President of the Commission goes exactly towards covering some of the accusations of democratic deficit. And I think those who are in favor of deepening democracy in Europe must surely be in favor of a process that has such a linkage between the voice of the people and the choice of who is going to lead the institutions. I think what one can foresee for the next few years is a greater responsiveness on the part of the presidency of the Commission, precisely because he will see his political survival as linked to the way that people are interpreting.
What are the antecedents of Jean-Claude Juncker? Where does he come from? I mean, viewers wouldn't know because he is a contentious figure. He is a figure who has, not exactly divided the European Union down the middle, but important countries have been critical of his coming on top. What are his political antecedents?
Jean-Claude Juncker is, I believe, 57 or 58 years old, but he's already been Prime Minister of his country, very small country, Luxembourg, for 18 years. Anybody familiar with Luxembourg politics will know that it is essentially about consensus building. It's about keeping various different traditions together. So he's done that very successfully in his country for 18 years. Lost after 18 years the elections some months ago, and was chosen by the largest political grouping of the European Parliament to be their candidate for President of the Commission. So he has had overwhelming support. 26 out of 28 countries supported him. You don't have unanimity. We have a democracy. We have different points of view. It's normal. There shouldn't
be convention. Even in a democracy, there are some conventions, and the convention here, Ambassador Cravinho, was some kind of a consensus figure that would be the president of the commission. Now that has not happened. This is the first time, as far as I recall, that the commission president is not by consensus. There have been two dissenters there, and very powerful dissenters among Britain, and if you call Hungary powerful as well.
Well,
would you?
Hungary is an interesting case because it's a country which has, anyway, I won't elaborate, this is not the subject. But in the case of Britain, we all know that they are, you might say, dyed-in-the-wool Eurosceptics. And that is the nature of British politics and of British history. If you allow me to broaden the debate in a nutshell, I would say that the European Union has basically three antecedents, in the sense there are three godfathers to the present European Union. The first is the de Gaulle project of a union of sovereign states in the Napoleonic framework or footprint. The second is the German Holy Roman Empire, you know, mostly Central Europe towards Eastern Europe. The third is the Euro-Atlantic community, which is the American, British-sponsored project, personified by NATO. And this has had all three ingredients have contributed to the forming of the European Union, but I also contend that they are in some way incompatible. And I'm afraid, as the French project seems to have faded after the unification of Germany, because France is no longer powerful enough to impose its way. Germany, on the other hand, has been building its own empire and linking up with Russia in a very powerful way. And as a result, now you see, in my view, a growing conflict between the Euro-Atlantic vision, which is the British-American one, which is being also supported by the present TISA negotiations, you know, the Transatlantic Services and Trade Agreement, which is being negotiated in secret, and which is disturbing a lot of people because it seems to lead to a sort of a federation in commercial and economic terms with the United States. And on the other hand, you have Germany, which has been quietly pursuing its own politics with Russia and with China. And I am just wondering if this is not going to lead to a split down the middle.
Does Russia gain?
I can't envisage such a split down the middle at all. I must say the United States has manifested serious concerns about the debate in the United Kingdom, whereby some part of the British political establishment is keen on seeing the United Kingdom out of the European Union. I don't believe that will come to pass, but I believe that if it were to happen, it would seriously disturb the relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom. And I don't think there could be any winners from that process. With regard to Russia, there is clearly at the moment major concerns, and we must all share these concerns with regard to a country that is very happy to tear up the Charter of the United Nations, annex territory belonging to its neighbors, territory that itself had recognized as part of the sovereign responsibility of another country. So these are questions which, for obvious historical reasons, are deeply felt in some parts of the European Union, and yet must be a concern for the international community as a whole. Europe is in the forefront of that. It's not easy to deal with such an issue, but it's something that we must do.
Ambassador Cravinho, that when the American ambassador to Kiev, Jeff Pyatt, and Ms. Newland, they landed there, and an agreement had just been signed with the European Union. He used a four-letter word. The American representative used a four-letter word to describe the European Union. Does that reflect in any way on the way the Americans regard the Europe?
I've been a member of government for 6 years, and while I will protest to you that my language is always impeccable, I must say that I have been privy to a number of conversations which are quite unprintable regarding allies, friends, and other such people.
You know what I'm talking about.
Miss Newland has apologized for her language and also for the content of her language. And I believe that's the issue can rest at that. It's quite clear that with regard to the Russian situation, the situation in Ukraine, we cannot be as gung-ho as some hotheads would like us to be on the other side of the Atlantic. Nevertheless, we have with the Obama administration, a commonality of purpose,
Yes.
which goes beyond slips of the tongue.
Thank you so much. In fact, on that note, we take a short break and then we resume the other part of our discussion on the EU elections. A short break and then we are back. Hello and welcome back to Wideangle. We were getting excited during the interval about some aspects of the transatlantic relationship. Now, talking of the Atlantic relationship, there's another dimension. Donald Rumsfeld and the neocons used the term Old Europe and New Europe. So, in other words, he was in his framework, England and UK and America is not the equation he had in mind. He thought the Eastern European countries, which had been freed recently, that is the new Europe, which is on board with him. They have, in fact, and so he must be very happy that they have all endorsed Jean-Claude Juncker, all of them.
Well, Mr. Rumsfeld belongs to a school of thought which I think will not go down in history as having been particularly insightful or helpful. One remembers what happened in 2003, and it is difficult not to associate it with current disastrous situation in that part of the world, in Iraq in particular. So I wouldn't pay too much attention to his thinkings. What I think is very important in this respect, though, is that we don't have any kind of division of that sort in Europe. It's not possible to find a geographical dividing line with regard to thinking about the future role of the Commission, the future priorities. One does find it's a complex political situation. One does find many different strains of thinking, just as one finds in India. One finds the same kind of richness of diversity in Europe. That's great, that's healthy. We're a democracy, that's the way things should be. But one does not find simplistic dividing lines of the sort that some people who are not so friendly to European project.
My understanding of it, Ambassador, I thought that the idea, look, the whole idea started because Europe did not want a repetition of 1914 and Europe did not want a repetition of 1939. These were the 2 years when they just stumbled and they went headlong into wars which were very, very devastating. The idea was that we should shed some of our individual, it was not total surrender of sovereignty, but we would tone down our nationalisms and somehow learn to live together in a canopy. That seems not to be happening because of these nationalisms. And unless we address the problem, why is the National Front so powerful in France? Why are the skinheads, whatever they call themselves in political terms, why are they so powerful in Britain? In Greece, completely the opposite. You have an ultra left which is knocking at the doors. Why is this happening?
Well, I think that one has to contextualize, and the context is that over 2/3, closer to 3/4 of the European electorate has strongly supported institutions or political parties that are favorable to the European project. So in a 751-person parliament, we do have the UKIP, the United Kingdom Independence Party, which wants the United Kingdom out of the European Union, but they represent 24 out of 751. We have the National Front, the French National Front represents 23 out of 751. The vast majority represent mainstream, with different lines of thinking between them, of course, but mainstream political parties.
I'm talking about the corrosion. I'm not talking about dominance. I'm saying that the main blocks are getting corroded, and this tendency seems to be growing. Combe?
You see, we have to look at some of the realities in the EU. And for example, there was a proposal for the European Constitution. It was proposed in a referendum in 2 countries, and both rejected it. In spite of that, there has been a sort of a patch-up which has been done, and many of the things that were in the European Constitution project are now in what effectively is the ruling law of the EU. And as a result, if you recall a somewhat unseemly incident when the Parliament sat in its first session a few days ago, they sang the European hymn, which is Beethoven's magnificent Hymn to Joy, and a number of anti-European deputies either turned their backs or refused to stand up. And the legal reason some of them gave is, well, it was never voted, so why should we have a hymn when it has not legally and constitutionally been adopted? They are trying to force down on us some sort of a fictional European national hymn. And that is, I think, where the rub is.
If you call up the European Union here, and I learn to my utter pleasure that you get Beethoven's Ninth and the Ode to Joy being played as the tune. Ambassador, thank you very much on that one. Mr. Vinod Grover, you have been rather quiet on your theme. You have been mulling over Europe and India, and that seems to be the theme that obsesses you. What is it that you would like to say on that?
Firstly, I have always advised all the ambassadors from the European Union who come to represent the European Union in India that they should somehow make the Indian public and Indian intellectuals, students, etc., much more aware of what the European Union stands for. At the moment, nobody knows what the who knows what the European Parliament is all about. Or the Human Rights Commission.
Great program going on.
Yeah, I know, but but this is one of the few programs. But even then, how far it will get, or how much interest people will take after this. So you really got to find a way through the universities and through the intellectual communities in India to spread the idea of what is the European Union. India looks frankly at the member states. Relations are with Germany, with France, UK the strongest, Italy maybe after that, and there are some reasons for that. One is Germany is your largest trading partner. EU as a whole is your largest trading partner, but Germany amongst them is your largest trading partner. UK and France are your major defense suppliers. But others really don't count very much in all this. Now, I feel, for instance, there has been a problem. I know it came about when I was there. I don't know whether it still exists, Ambassador. For instance, any talks of terrorism with Europe, which is very important to us. I don't know whether the EU, it didn't exist, the EU intelligence cell. We had to deal with the intelligence of 27 countries.
Ambassador?
Yeah, well, on this particular issue, we do have a counterterrorism dialogue with India, and what happens is that terrorism is precise example of a subject that cannot be dealt with individually. Individual nation states, India, United States, or whoever, and of course the smaller European countries cannot deal with these issues on their own, and so they share. And we have a very high degree of sharing inside the European Union. That's what allows us to have an EU-India dialogue on counterterrorism. But I take Ambassador Grover's point of view. He's quite right. There's a lot of work to be done in terms of public outreach, in terms of explaining the European Union. At the same time, there's a tremendous amount that can be gained from working with what exists. We have with China, for example, a level of interaction that is much, much deeper. And yet, with India, we share this characteristic of being a democracy. We share so much more. We should have so much more than we do have with China. The reality is not that. The reality is that every month or every week even, we have in Brussels a delegation from China looking at issues of urbanization, looking at issues of employment, looking at issues of health. All sorts of different areas of work which we have not yet managed to develop with India. My expectation is that with the new government and with the new priorities that the government has enunciated, we should have plenty to build on in the EU-India relationship.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Combe. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Ambassador Grover. What is happening is this, that from what you said, the time has run out. You see, tomorrow, William Hague is here, the Secretary, the British Foreign Secretary is here. The Chancellor of the Exchequer is here. The Prime Minister is going to be meeting Angela Merkel somewhere. Maybe, I wish they'd sat together and watched the final, and which Germany may win. So therefore, individual countries are doing a great deal of very enthusiastic and lively trade and communication with India. I do not see European Union as a whole in the picture as much as I see its, I mean, its parts, its component parts are actually dealing with India. And European Union, I do not see as much in profile. That is my observation. And on that note, I'm afraid I have to end. But on another occasion, Ambassador, you will have a long time to explain that one. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Hãy subscribe cho kênh Ghiền Mì Gõ để không bỏ lỡ